You cross a certain age threshold, usually somewhere around like 40, and suddenly you have a favorite knee.
Right, yeah.
And
Or a shoulder you just absolutely refuse to sleep on anymore.
exactly. I mean, we all know the routine. You wake up, you stretch, something randomly pops, a joint creaks when you go down the stairs, and you just kind of sigh.
Yeah, it's just accepted.
Right. The universally accepted assumption is that this is simply what getting older feels like. We treat it like this inevitable biological countdown, a rite of passage we're all just stuck with.
And it's treated as an absolute given in our culture. The prevailing narrative is that, well, the human body is just a machine that eventually wears down.
Yeah, just rusting away.
Pretty much. And the idea is there's absolutely nothing you can do about it except, maybe try to ignore it or temporarily numb the area. But looking closely at the clinical research we have today, that mechanical resignation is actually a fundamentally flawed way to view human biology.
Which is exactly why we're digging into this today. We've got a really fascinating stack of excerpts on a topic called joint genesis and advanced joint lubrication.
It's a really eye-opening set of data.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to cut through all the information overload and uncover the hidden biological reason why everyday activities like walking your dog, gardening, or, even just getting out of bed suddenly start to feel so difficult. We're going to look at the underlying mechanisms of joint hydration and what the latest research says can actually be done to fix it.
Shifting our perspective here is critical, moving away from just accepting joint degradation as some passive symptom of aging, and instead looking at the active cellular mechanisms of lubrication. It could fundamentally change how we approach human longevity.
Yeah, it's a huge paradigm shift.
It's about actively preserving your physical agency, not just managing a slow, painful decline.
What struck me in these sources wasn't just the biology itself, but how completely backward our standard approach to aging seems to be. But before we get to the solution, I kind of have to push back on this premise right out of the gate.
Sure, go for it.
Because the whole machine idea is just so ingrained in us. Isn't joint discomfort actually just bones rubbing together after a lifetime of wear and tear? If you use a metal hinge for 50 years, the metal physically wears down.
Right, the classic hinge analogy.
Yeah, isn't that precisely what's happening inside our knees and hips?
It's a tempting analogy, and, well, mechanical stress certainly plays a role over decades. But the machine analogy breaks down in one really critical way.
Which is?
Unlike a cold metal car engine, your joints are living, dynamic tissues. The sources point out that researchers and mobility specialists are actually identifying a much more significant underlying culprit way before the bone ever degrades.
Oh, I see. What is it?
Declining joint lubrication. Specifically, we're talking about severe localized dehydration inside the joint capsule itself.
Localized dehydration. I struggle to wrap my head around that concept a bit. If my joints are drying out, why wouldn't my body just, divert water from elsewhere in the system?
It seems like it should, right?
Yeah. It feels like an evolutionary flaw that our primary shock absorbers would just arbitrarily dry up right when we hit middle age.
Well, to answer that, you have to understand that the fluid inside your joints isn't just water. Healthy joints are encased in a membrane that produces something called synovial fluid.
Synovial fluid, right.
And you can think of synovial fluid as a highly specialized non-Newtonian fluid. It basically acts as the body's built-in cushion and shock absorber.
Okay.
It sits right there in the microscopic space between the cartilage of your bones, and its entire job is to ensure the joint glides with near zero friction, while also, absorbing massive impact loads.
Okay, let's unpack this. So it's basically the oil in the engine. When there's plenty of oil, everything is quiet, it runs cool, and it's completely smooth. But when that oil dries out, you get that grinding metal-on-metal friction. It gets hot, and the machine struggles.
That's close. But here's where the living tissue aspect really changes things. When a machine loses oil, it just grinds until it breaks.
Right.
But when your joint loses synovial fluid, that resulting friction triggers a biological alarm system. The living tissue reacts to the friction by triggering an inflammatory immune response.
Oh, wow. So it fights back.
Right. The joint gets inflamed, swollen, and stiff. So when that synovial fluid begins to thin out or decline in volume, you aren't just losing the glide, you're actively triggering a hostile environment inside the joint.
So the friction is the trigger, not just the symptom.
Exactly.
Which honestly makes a lot of sense when you look at how this actually feels for the person experiencing it. So if you're listening to this, how do you know if your own localized oil is running low?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because the source material lists some very specific early warning signs, and they are things people brush off every single day because they happen so gradually.
Yeah, most people don't even notice it until the inflammation is already chronic.
Right. The first warning sign mentioned is morning stiffness. Just feeling incredibly rigid or like really slow moving right after you wake up.
Very common.
Yeah. And then there's that cracking or grinding sensation, which literally sounds like the increased friction we just talked about.
That's exactly what it is.
And then there's tightness after sitting.
Right.
Like if you watch a movie and it takes you several minutes to kind of loosen up when you finally stand.
The underlying biology driving those specific symptoms is fascinating. When we talk about synovial fluid thinning out or drying up, we really have to look at the molecular architecture of that fluid.
Okay, getting to the microscopic level.
Yeah. The research highlights one very specific molecule, and that's hyaluronic acid.
Wait, hyaluronic acid, I see that plastered all over skincare bottles.
Oh, absolutely. It's heavily marketed in dermatology for retaining moisture in the skin, but its most critical systemic role is actually inside healthy joints.
Really? I had no idea it was inside the joints.
Yeah, it naturally exists in the synovial fluid, and its molecular structure is what gives that fluid its thick, viscous texture. Think of hyaluronic acid as a biological water magnet.
A water magnet. I like that visual.
It's a massive, long-chain molecule that binds to water, holding on to incredible amounts of moisture. Its job is to draw in and trap that moisture within the synovial fluid, ensuring the joint stays plump, highly pressurized, and perfectly cushioned.
So it's literally holding the water molecules in place so they don't just like dissipate back into the bloodstream. It's maintaining the local pressure.
Yes, exactly. The molecular weight of hyaluronic acid is what gives synovial fluid its viscoelasticity.
Viscoelasticity.
Yeah, meaning it can be thick and gummy when you're standing still to provide cushioning, but it becomes slippery and fluid the absolute second you start moving to allow for a smooth glide.
But the research points out a major biological catch here. Our natural production of this hyaluronic acid just drops off a cliff as we age.
Unfortunately, yes.
And it's not just a slight dip. As that HA decreases, the synovial fluid fundamentally loses its ability to hold on to moisture. The viscosity changes, the fluid thins out, the joint capsule loses its pressure, and it effectively just dries out from the inside.
And that biological drop-off is exactly what causes the morning stiffness.
Really?
Yeah. The enzymes in your body that naturally break down old hyaluronic acid, they're called hyaluronidases, they start outpacing your body's ability to produce new HA. So the shock-absorbing cushion basically just flattens out.
Which totally shifts the paradigm. It's not necessarily that your bone is just worn down to nothing from using it too much. It's that the fluid protecting the bone has lost its primary water magnet.
Exactly. The cushion is deflated.
This leads us perfectly into how the source material addresses the fix, and why this specific supplement, Joint Genesis, is dominating the clinical conversation in these excerpts.
The text focuses heavily on joint genesis because it was designed around this exact mechanism of localized dehydration, and it draws heavily from recent Ivy League research on synovial fluid dynamics.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. You can buy generic hyaluronic acid supplements at literally any grocery store.
You can, yeah.
So what makes this specific formulation in the research actually work? Doesn't stomach acid just destroy standard long-chain HA molecules before they ever even reach a joint?
That's an excellent pushback, and it's the exact problem with most conventional joint supplements out there.
I figured.
Standard oral hyaluronic acid has a very high molecular weight, making it incredibly difficult for the gastrointestinal tract to absorb.
Yeah.
The body just breaks it down in the stomach so it never reaches the synovial fluid. You're effectively taking a placebo.
Oh, wow. So you're turning off the check engine light or maybe temporarily numbing the pain, but you aren't adding oil back to the car.
You aren't changing the internal environment at all. What the excerpts highlight about the joint genesis approach is the specific pharmacokinetics involved.
Pharmacokinetic.
Basically how it moves through the body. It utilizes a highly specialized matrix, often referred to in the clinical data as mobily, which is an advanced bioavailable form of hyaluronic acid that actually survives the digestive process.
Wait, so it actually reaches the joint capsule?
It doesn't just reach the joint capsule. The clinical data suggests it actually stimulates the cells lining the joint, the synoviocytes, to start multiplying and producing their own hyaluronic acid again.
Are you serious? It restarts the body's own production.
Exactly. It's not just delivering external HA, it's rebooting the factory. Furthermore, the formulation incorporates specific, highly potent antioxidants. Remember those enzymes we talked about, the ones that break down your HA?
The hyaluronidases?
Right. The antioxidants in this specific clinical stack are designed to neutralize those degrading enzymes and cool off the inflammatory response caused by the friction.
Wow.
So you are simultaneously delivering a surviving matrix of HA, stimulating your body's natural production, and putting the brakes on the enzymes that destroy it.
That is a wildly different approach than just taking a generic painkiller. It's treating the root cause by actively manipulating the joint's fluid dynamics. And the experts are saying that restoring this internal environment is the literal key to easier bending, stretching, and daily mobility.
Because you're restoring the viscoelasticity of the fluid. You're putting the physical glide back into the joint space.
Which brings us to the human cost of all this, because the source material actually zooms out from the microscopic biology and looks at what happens to people when this fluid dries up. And it's honestly a bit tragic.
It really is.
People unknowingly stop participating in the hobbies they love simply because the movement no longer feels easy.
The psychological and lifestyle stakes are just as high as the physical ones. We tend to isolate joint health as a purely clinical issue, pain scores and range of motion. But the reality is that your world shrinks.
Exactly. You stop gardening because getting on your knees is agonizing. You stop walking the dog as far because your hips feel tight and heavy. You start declining invitations to go on hikes or, walk around the city with your friends.
Right, you're making these micro compromises every day.
Yeah, until you're just living a smaller life.
You're touching on what the clinical researchers call the mobility cycle. And it is an incredibly dangerous trap. When movement feels stiff or restricted due to that localized friction, the natural human response is to stop moving.
Sure, we rest to avoid the pain.
But resting a compromised joint is actually one of the worst things you can do for it.
Wait, why? If it's inflamed and grinding, wouldn't resting it prevent further damage?
It seems intuitive, I know, but here's the biological catch. Your cartilage does not have a direct blood supply. It is completely avascular.
Wait, really? No blood supply at all? How does it stay alive if it doesn't get blood?
It relies entirely on the synovial fluid for its oxygen and nutrients. And the only way that cartilage can absorb those nutrients is through movement.
Through movement. Okay.
Yeah. When you move, the physical pressure on the joint squeezes the cartilage like a sponge, pushing old waste out. When you take the pressure off, the cartilage expands and sucks in fresh synovial fluid and nutrients. It's an osmotic pump.
Oh, that is mind-blowing. So the joint literally has to be compressed and released to, breathe.
Yes. So when you stop moving because your joints hurt, you are effectively turning off the nutrient pump. The cartilage begins to starve. Furthermore, when you stop moving, the muscles surrounding and supporting that joint begin to atrophy.
So by resting to protect the joint, you're starving the cartilage and weakening the muscles that are supposed to absorb the shock. That's a terrible cycle.
Which means the next time you do try to move, more physical load is transferred directly onto the compromised, starving cartilage. The friction is worse, the pain is worse, so you rest even more.
And the cycle accelerates.
Exponentially. This is why preserving mobility isn't just about walking upstairs. It's about preserving your independence, your cardiovascular health, and preventing a massive cascade of physical decline.
It's the difference between living an active, vibrant life and feeling like a prisoner in your own mighty. You want to intervene the second you notice that morning stiffness before you fall down that negative mobility cycle.
Proactive intervention is always superior to reactive damage control, especially when dealing with a vascular tissue that is notoriously slow to heal.
Which brings us to a crucial part of the source material. Anyone who loves having the full picture needs to know that joint genesis, despite the advanced pharmacokinetics we just talked about, isn't meant to be a standalone magic trick.
Oh, definitely not.
You don't just take an advanced HA matrix, sit on the couch for 10 hours a day, and expect your knees to feel like you're 20 again. The research outlines a holistic blueprint-like, actual practical lifestyle habits that work synergistically with this cellular hydration.
Because you have to support the entire system. A targeted supplement can reboot the localized environment, but your daily habits dictate the systemic environment.
So let's connect the dots on these habits, because reading the text, they make so much more sense now that we understand the biology. First, they emphasize staying active with gentle, low-impact movement, like walking, stretching, or swimming.
Which ties directly back to that osmotic pump mechanism we just mentioned. Swimming is the perfect example.
Oh, because of the water?
Right. The buoyancy of the water removes the sheer gravitational force from the joint, so you aren't grinding the cartilage. But the full range of motion involved in swimming actively pumps the synovial fluid, flushing out metabolic waste and pulling in the fresh hyaluronic acid and nutrients you're trying to build up.
Ah, so you're operating the pump without grinding the gears.
Precisely. You're maintaining the viscoelasticity of the fluid through consistent, gentle shear forces.
Next up, the sources focus on prioritizing anti-inflammatory foods. Diets rich in healthy fats, omega-3s, and lean proteins. But I have to ask, if the joint capsule is isolated and avascular, how much does a systemic diet actually matter to the knee?
It matters immensely because of those degrading enzymes we discussed. Systemic inflammation, which is often driven by poor diets heavy in processed foods and refined sugars, upregulates the body's entire inflammatory immune response.
Okay, so it turns the whole system on high alert.
Yes, and this systemic inflammation increases the activity of hyaluronidases across the board. By consuming omega-3s and antioxidants, you are systematically downregulating the enzymes that are trying to chew up your drug fluid.
Okay, so a bad diet is basically sending reinforcements to the enzymes destroying your joints. That paints a very clear picture. The next habit mentioned is avoiding excessive sedentary time, like sitting for long periods.
Again, it's about fluid dynamics. When you sit completely still for hours, the synovial fluid pooling in the joint capsule actually cools down and becomes highly viscous, almost like a thick gel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the soft tissues tighten around it. Frequent, light movement throughout the day keeps the fluid warm and less viscous, maintaining the glide.
And the last two habits might surprise people, but they are critical. Systemic hydration, literally drinking enough water and supporting recovery through quality sleep and stress management.
Crucial components.
Yeah, if we know the hyaluronic acid is a water magnet, it seems pretty obvious that systemic hydration is step one.
You have to give the magnet something to attract. If you are chronically dehydrated, the osmotic pressure in your blood changes, and your body will not prioritize pushing water into the synovial capsule. Your joints will dry out simply because there isn't enough systemic water to go around.
But what about the sleep part? How does sleeping fix a dry knee?
It comes down to circadian biology and cellular repair. Tissue regeneration, including the synthesis of new hyaluronic acid by your synoviocytes, peaks during the deep, slow-wave stages of sleep.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, chronic stress and lack of sleep drastically elevate cortisol levels. High cortisol suppresses tissue repair and spikes systemic inflammation. Healthy aging and cellular regeneration require that deep parasympathetic recovery state just as much as they require physical activity.
It's a complete ecosystem. You can't separate the isolated knee from the entire biological machine. You have to hydrate the system, manage the systemic inflammation, keep the physical pump moving, and give the cells time to repair.
Exactly.
And when you combine that lifestyle foundation with the advanced targeted support for localized fluid dynamics, like the specific matrix utilized in joint genesis, you're completely changing the trajectory of your mobility.
You are shifting from being a passive victim of age-related degradation to an active architect of your own cellular health.
I love the agency in that. So to wrap this deep dive up, we really need to throw out this archaic idea of wear and tear. We need to stop assuming our bones are just inevitably grinding down to dust because of some vague concept of aging.
Throw it completely out the window.
Instead, we need to view our joints as dynamic, living environments driven by hydration, localized pressure, and complex fluid viscosity. It's about maintaining that biological shock absorber at the cellular level so we don't end up trapped in that terrifying cycle of immobility.
It makes you wonder, though, about the long-term implications of this biological shift.
What do you mean?
Well, if we can now successfully hack the hydration of our synovial fluid, bypass digestion to stimulate our own cells, and artificially regenerate that internal environment, how far are we from a future where wear and tear joint replacements become a completely obsolete medical procedure?
Wow.
What if going under the knife to replace a knee with titanium soon becomes as medically archaic as using leeches?
Now that is a fascinating thought to leave on. The idea that the most common surgeries of our generation might just disappear because we finally learned how to water our joints. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective on the complex biology keeping you moving and the tools you have to protect it. Keep exploring, stay curious, and most importantly, keep that synovial fluid pumping. We'll catch you on the next one.